It wasn't supposed to feel like this. I used to imagine pregnancy as something soft and sacred. Lullabies playing low, his hand resting gently on my stomach, us laughing together over weird cravings at midnight. But instead, I got silence. A kind that didn't come from peace, but from distance. Marco started coming home later, smelling like cologne I didn't wear, and carrying excuses he barely tried to sell. At first, I blamed work, stress, maybe nerves. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. I found out on a Tuesday. His phone lit up while he was in the shower. Her name popped up with a heart emoji. I clicked. There were messages, pictures, a life that didn't include me or the baby growing inside of me. When I confronted him, he didn't even flinch. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're just not exciting anymore. It's like, you're already a mom." Like that was a flaw. Like carrying our child had somehow made me less of a woman in his eyes. My legs almost gave out, not from the betrayal, but from the cruelty. The next morning, he was gone. No note, no call, just an empty side of the bed and his keys missing from the hook by the door. I stood there in the kitchen, one hand cradling my belly, the other shaking as I tried to make coffee I couldn't drink. The air felt colder, like the house had grieved with me overnight. I didn't chase him, didn't beg. Because even though I hadn't said it out loud yet, I'd already made a quiet promise to my son. We'd be okay. Somehow, we'd be okay. The days that followed were a blur. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at the baby clothes I'd folded weeks earlier with so much hope. I'd imagined Marco picking out a tiny onesie, fumbling with the snaps, laughing at how small everything looked. Instead, it was just me, folding and unfolding, wondering if I'd missed some sign, some moment where he slipped through my fingers and I didn't notice. Every hour dragged by, heavy with the weight of questions I couldn't answer and a silence I couldn't fill. Labor came early, 2 weeks before my due date. I rode to the hospital in the back of a rideshare, gripping my phone so tightly I left little crescent-shaped marks on my palm. No one was there to hold my hand. No one paced the hallway or kissed my forehead in the chaos. Just nurses and beeping machines and a pale blue curtain that separated me from every dream I once had. And then, after the pain and the fear and the absolute breaking of my body, there he was. My son, Leo, all 10 fingers, all 10 toes. He didn't cry right away. He just blinked at me, calm, like he knew I needed that. I held him for hours, skin to skin. My tears wetting his hair while I whispered promises I hadn't planned to make alone. I told him we'd build something, just the two of us, that he wasn't a detour or a burden. He was the whole map now. And in that cold, quiet hospital room, I realized something. Marco hadn't just walked out. He'd given me the space to become someone I didn't even know I could be. I wasn't ready, but I was willing, and maybe that was enough. The first night home with Leo felt like stepping into a life I hadn't rehearsed. The crib stood ready, the bottles lined up like soldiers, but none of that prepared me for the cries at 2 a.m., the ache in my chest, or the way the house creaked louder without another adult presence. Every little thing became a mountain, a diaper change, a burp, a nap that wouldn't come. I was running on fumes, but I kept going because he needed me. And maybe, if I'm honest, I needed him even more. People said I looked tired and they weren't wrong, but they didn't see the way Leo's eyes searched for me in the morning, like I was his whole world. They didn't hear the way he cooed when I sang off key, or how his tiny fist gripped my finger like an anchor. That's what Marco called him. An anchor. But he didn't know that anchors don't just weigh you down. Sometimes they keep you steady. And even when I felt like I was unraveling, Leo reminded me I was still here, still standing, still his. Marco never came back, not for a visit, not for a call. He disappeared completely, like we'd been a phase he outgrew. But I wasn't waiting at the window. I wasn't checking my phone anymore. Because while he left to start over with someone else, I stayed and started something real. I built a life, raw, imperfect, but ours. And I realized something no one tells you. Sometimes being left isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the start of the one you were meant to write. Some mornings, I'd forget what rest felt like. Leo would cry before the sun came up, and I'd shuffle to his crib with muscles that ached like I'd climbed a mountain overnight. No partner to take turns, no warm body beside me to say, "I've got him." Just me, whispering lullabies with a dry throat and blinking through exhaustion while the bottle warmed. It was brutal, no other word for it, but even in the blur of it all, there was purpose. Every time he looked up at me, I felt something in my chest realign. Money was tight, tighter than I'll ever admit out loud. Some days I skipped lunch so I could afford Leo's formula. The bills piled up on the kitchen counter, turning into a kind of paper sculpture of everything I feared. I tried going back to my old job, but they'd replaced me. So I started small, baking banana bread while Leo napped, selling it in the neighborhood group chat. It wasn't glamorous. I used the same oven that once burned Marco's frozen pizzas, but this time I was feeding something that mattered. People started talking. First it was neighbors, then the preschool moms. Soon I had strangers knocking, asking if this was where Leo's crumbs came from. I didn't have a storefront, just a living room with flour in the carpet and a baby monitor clipped to my apron. But something shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was growing roots. And people didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with respect. Not because I was perfect, but because I was still standing when no one thought I would be. Every batch I baked carried a little more of my story. A splash of fear, a pinch of hope, and a whole lot of stubbornness. There were days I burned everything, days Leo refused to nap, days I cried over spilled batter like it meant something bigger. But I kept going. I'd strap Leo to my chest, turn on old jazz, and let the rhythm of mixing and measuring drown out the doubt. The kitchen became my battlefield, not of anger, but of quiet determination. I wasn't just feeding customers, I was feeding our future. I started setting goals, little ones at first. Sell 10 muffins, pay the electric bill, buy a second-hand stroller without putting it on a credit card. Each victory felt like a miracle, and the people around me started noticing. The barista down the street offered to sell my scones. A friend helped design a logo. Even the local paper ran a tiny story. Single mom builds sweet success with Leo's crumbs. I cut it out and taped it to the fridge, right above Leo's finger painting. 2 kinds of art, side by side, both mine. Still, there were moments. Nights when the loneliness sat too close, whispering that Marco had the easier deal. He walked away free. I stayed and carried everything. The heartbreak, the hunger, the baby, the dream. But those moments passed faster now. I'd look at Leo sleeping with his little fist curled under his cheek, and I'd remember, he didn't leave me behind. He gave me a reason to move forward. And even if no one else ever said it, I knew deep down I was doing something right. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being the girl who got left. I became the woman with the muffins, or Leo's mom, or just Elena again. No sad story attached. People smiled at me differently now, with curiosity instead of pity. They asked for advice, asked about my recipes, asked how I managed it all. And I'd laugh and say I didn't. Not always. But I'd learned how to catch myself mid-fall. To breathe, to try again, to show up anyway. That was the secret, I think. Showing up when it would have been easier not to. I never hated Marco. I think that surprised people. I pitied him, maybe. He'd abandoned something extraordinary before it had even bloomed. He missed the first time Leo rolled over, missed the bakery's first sold-out weekend, missed the quiet moment when I realized I was proud of myself. Really, truly proud. I didn't need him to come back. I'd built something solid without him, but that didn't mean I wasn't prepared, deep down, for the day he might try. Because life has a funny way of circling back. And sometimes the ones who leave realize too late what they walked away from. It happened on a Sunday. I was icing lemon cookies when the doorbell rang. Not a knock, not a text, just that sharp, unexpected chime that made my heart skip. Leo was in his playpen, babbling to his stuffed bear, and the kitchen smelled like butter and zest. Everything was normal, until I opened the door, and there he was, Marco, standing on my porch like time hadn't passed, like he hadn't vanished the moment I needed him most. He looked different, Not older, just worn. Like life hadn't been as kind to him as he'd expected. His eyes scanned me slowly, taking in the apron, the flower on my sleeve, the toddler toys scattered behind me. And then he smiled. That same smile that used to melt me. But it didn't now. It didn't move me at all. He said my name like a question. Elena? And I nodded. My voice stayed calm, steadier than I felt. You found your way back, I said, like we were just two old classmates catching up. He asked to see Leo, said he'd made mistakes, that he missed out, that he thought about us more than I could imagine. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just listened, let him talk. And when he finished, I smiled, just a little. I told him it might be nice for Leo to meet the man who walked away from him before he even had a name. He didn't know what to say to that. But I think in that moment, he realized I wasn't the same woman he left behind. He sat on my couch like it was still his, legs crossed, arms stretched out, trying to look relaxed, but his eyes kept darting to Leo, who was now watching him like he was a stranger at the zoo, which he was. Marco asked questions about Leo's first word, his favorite foods, how I managed everything on my own. I answered politely, like a host at a polite dinner. Not cold, just aware. Aware that this wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning wrapped in small talk. He mentioned the woman he'd left me for, as if I might be curious. Said it didn't work out, that she wasn't ready for real life. I almost laughed. The irony didn't even sting. It just felt like confirmation. He talked about wanting to step up, to be involved, to do the right thing. I let him say it all. I nodded, offered tea, even pulled out a photo album when he asked to see baby pictures. And all the while, I studied him the way a surgeon studies an incision. Carefully, with full awareness of what's underneath. By the time he left, he seemed hopeful. Like he'd planted a seed. Like the door had cracked open and he might slide back into the life he'd abandoned. I walked him to the door, Leo on my hip, and told him we'd love to have lunch next weekend. He smiled, relieved, almost smug, and said he was glad we could be civil. I watched him walk away. And in my mind, I whispered, "You have no idea which table you're about to sit at." That entire week, I baked like a woman possessed. Not for stress, not even for orders, but for clarity. There's something about dough under your fingers that helps you think straight. I replayed every word Marco said, every shift in his voice. He really believed he could walk back in and rewrite the narrative, as if I'd been frozen in time waiting for his return. But I hadn't waited. I'd lived. I'd built. And now, I was ready to show him just how much he'd missed while he was gone. I picked the restaurant, quiet, local, the kind of place with linen napkins and soft music. I made the reservation in both our names. I told him to come hungry, and oh, he did. He arrived early, dressed better than before, trying to impress. He brought a small gift for Leo, some clumsy gesture that said, "I'm trying." But I didn't need an apology wrapped in ribbon. I needed something else. Not vengeance. That's never been my flavor. What I wanted was precision, truth, and a clean finish. As we sat down, I noticed how he looked at me, not with guilt, but curiosity, like he was trying to understand how I'd become this version of myself without him. I offered him a smile and asked if he was ready to talk about the future. He nodded, hopeful. He didn't realize that this lunch wasn't about second chances. It was about closure, mine, not his. He ordered pasta. Something rich and buttery, like the old days. I didn't eat much. My appetite wasn't for food that day. I let him talk, watched him spin stories about change, growth, regret. He said fatherhood had been gnawing at him, that he dreamed of Leo, that he realized what he'd thrown away. I sipped my tea and nodded at the right moments, not because I believed him, but because I wanted him to feel comfortable. Comfortable people talk more, and I wanted every word. Then I leaned in, not aggressively, just enough to shift the energy. I asked questions about his priorities, his values, where he saw himself in 5 years. He stumbled through answers, tripping on words like stability and commitment. He thought we were reconnecting, that this was some redemptive arc. But what he didn't see, what he never saw, was that I wasn't looking for resolution. I was building my case. And right on cue, as dessert menus hit the table, I reached into my bag. I slid the folder across to him, neat, thick, sealed with intention. "Before you say anything else," I said, "just read." His smile faltered, but he opened it. Inside, child support calculations, full custody documents, and a printout of texts he thought he'd deleted, the ones where he called Leo an accident and me dead weight. I watched the blood drain from his face, watched his jaw tighten, his eyes flicker to the exit. "You left me with silence," I whispered. "Now I'm giving you a choice." He didn't speak for a while, just sat there, blinking, flipping through pages like he might find a loophole or a lifeline tucked between the legal terms. But it was all there, crystal clear, undeniable, the numbers, the abandonment, the screenshots with timestamps and his full name. I'd gathered it over months, not out of revenge, but readiness. Because I knew a man like Marco would only return when he thought he could reclaim what he left. And I needed him to know this wasn't his story anymore. He finally looked up, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not shame. That would have required more heart than he had. No, it was fear. The kind that creeps in when you realize the person you underestimated built something stronger without you. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "This is all legal, above board. If you sign, you walk away clean. You don't pay a cent more than what's listed. You stay gone. No visits, no mixed messages, just space, for good." "And if I don't?" he asked, already knowing the answer. That's when I handed him the second envelope. Same proof, but this time addressed to family court, and a second copy, labeled for the press. Local outlets love a redemption story, but they also love a scandal. "You don't get to frame this," I told him, my voice steady. "Not anymore." He held the pen like it burned his fingers. And I just sat back, watching him squirm in the seat he used to own. He signed. I watched the ink dry like it meant something final, and in a way, it did. It wasn't the kind of victory you cheer for. It was quieter than that, deeper. The kind that wraps around your spine and reminds you you're no longer the woman who begged, no longer the one who broke in silence. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into my bag, and thanked him for coming. He tried to meet my eyes one last time, but I didn't give him that. I'd given enough. He mumbled something on his way out, an apology, maybe, or a curse. I didn't catch it, and I didn't care to. Because while he was walking away for the second time, I wasn't standing in the same place anymore. I was miles ahead. I paid the check myself, left a tip that could have fed us for 2 days, and walked back to my car like it was just another Saturday. But inside, everything had shifted. This time, I was the one who closed the door. It wasn't revenge out of hate. It was justice, written in my own handwriting, wrapped in dignity, sealed with truth. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to reclaim the story he tried to hijack. And I did. Not with rage, but with clarity, boundaries, and the power he never expected I'd find without him. After he walked away that second time, something inside me settled. It wasn't joy, exactly. More like a deep exhale after holding my breath for too long. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat in my car with the signed papers on the passenger seat, hands on the wheel, watching the world go on around me like it always had. That was the thing. Life didn't stop when he left, and it wouldn't stop now. I had work to do, cookies to bake, a little boy to raise, and a future that no longer had a shadow trailing behind it. Leo was teething, sleeping in fits, needing extra snuggles. I held him tighter that night, pressing my cheek to his tiny forehead as he whimpered in my arms. But even through the fatigue, I felt light, clean. Like I'd finally pulled the last shard of glass out of a wound I didn't realize was still bleeding. The bakery was growing faster than I could keep up with. I was already scouting a second location. I'd been invited to speak at a women's business panel. Me. The girl who once had to choose between groceries and diapers. I started writing late at night, once Leo fell asleep, pouring everything I'd lived into quiet, anonymous blog posts. Just thoughts, memories, lessons. I never used names, never blamed. Just wrote like someone who survived the fire and wanted to help others walk through theirs. I didn't expect anyone to find it, but they did. Comments started trickling in. Women saying they felt seen, heard, stronger. And without even trying, I'd built something bigger than a bakery. I'd built a voice. The blog grew slowly, then all at once. One post went semi-viral. A letter I wrote to the woman I used to be, the one who cried into cold hospital sheets with no hand to hold. It wasn't bitter. It was raw, honest. And somehow that honesty made its way across screens I'd never imagined. People shared it, quoted it. A local radio station invited me on. They wanted to know how I'd turned a betrayal into a brand, how I kept going when everything fell apart. I didn't have a perfect answer. I just told the truth. Somewhere across town, Marco's life was unraveling again. I didn't look for updates, but they found me. A friend from high school mentioned his new girlfriend, the one he left me for, had packed up and moved out. Apparently, she found the blog, put the pieces together, realized the man beside her had once walked away from his own child and never looked back. It wasn't revenge. I hadn't written it for her. But the truth, when spoken aloud, has a way of echoing in places you never expect. I won't lie. When I heard she left him, I felt something. Not satisfaction, not glee, just closure. Like a door finally clicked shut after years of creaking open. He taught me how to live alone, but I taught him what it felt like to be left behind, not with cruelty, but with consequence. Life has a rhythm, a way of circling back, and when it does, you see things clearly, not with rage, but with peace. The kind that can only come when you've walked through fire and refused to stay burned. Leo's 3 now. He laughs with his whole body and asks questions that could stop traffic. Every time he says "Mom," I hear strength in it, not just his, but mine. Our mornings are loud and sticky with jam. Our nights are soft with books and bedtime songs. The life I built didn't just survive, it bloomed. And the best part? I'm not defined by what I lost. I'm defined by what I created. By every hard decision, every silent night, every step forward when I could have stayed down. The bakery is now a regional name. I have employees, a website, a wait list. But beyond that, I have impact. I've spoken at women's centers, schools, conferences. I tell my story not to reopen wounds, but to show others they can heal theirs. People ask me all the time, would you take him back if he really changed? And I smile every time, because the answer isn't angry. It's simple. I didn't grow just to shrink again. I didn't climb out just to invite the fall. I still write, late at night. Not just for myself now, but for the woman who might stumble onto my words when her world has just cracked open. I write for her. For the girl with trembling hands and a full belly and no plan. I want her to know, it's okay to break. It's okay to begin again. He left me. But I stayed. And I didn't just rebuild. I rose, one crumb at a time.